on with That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. New episodes each weekday morning at 9 a.m. on thatbusinessnetwork.com. Connect with us all across social media as well. We've done plenty of programming on this show, and so there's a lot of content out there across a variety of different social media outlets. You'll find our YouTube channel over at thatyoutubechannel.com. Twitter is at That Biz Show, and also Facebook.com/That Business Show. Those are three of the most heavily used social media outlets for the program, and we can put all the new shows that are coming up each and every week on the weekend, and then air them each weekday morning at 9 a.m. on thatbusinessnetwork.com. Also pay attention to this site. We're beginning to develop the community of those guys and those gals. So become one of those guys or become one of those gals today by learning more at thatbusinessnetwork.com. We're just about to formally roll out the crowdfunding and launch of that campaign. So a whole t-shirt and marketing program designed around the community. And so again, we want you to become one of those guys or one of those gals today. And we'll have that in coming episodes here on the program. And keep an eye out at thatbusinessnetwork.com for more information on the membership benefits of that and how that program is going to work. Also, sponsorship availability is now open on this program. We do have a few different sponsorship levels available, and you can review all that over on the Join Us tab on thatbusinessnetwork.com. If you'd like to come onto the program as a guest, we are always looking for content and material for the show. Simply visit tbsinterview.com for more information. Again, tbsinterview.com. We have a scheduler there and information on how to come onto the program. So on today's program, talk a little bit about O J Simpson. He's been in the news here lately, being in Tampa, Florida. It's a good possibility that OJ is coming to live here in my neighborhood. And with his son and his daughter are living just across the bay in St. Petersburg. And so if you've been following the news, and it's kind of hard not to hear about O J Simpson. This is a person who's been in the news continually since his trial in the mid-90s and his subsequent conviction of the armed robbery charges here over the last, which was like 7 or 8 years ago now. He was released, he hasn't been released yet, but he was issued parole just last week, and so he should be getting released around the beginning of October. And his son and his daughter live here in Tampa Bay, Florida. They live specifically over in St. Petersburg, and so he wants to be with his family. So there's a good opportunity, a good chance that he is going to be living with them or living around them. His son, he has a couple of sons from another marriage, or he has one son from another marriage, and then the son that lives in St. Petersburg is Justin. Ironically enough, Justin is a real estate agent with my company. He's a Coldwell Banker real estate agent in a different office. I don't know the person personally, but he is a realtor with Coldwell Banker. He was discovered, or would say outed, I guess, several years ago by the St. Petersburg Times, I believe it was, that found their location, but don't want to burden their children with any of what has happened in OJ's life. They've been living under the radar, and rightfully so. The media needs to give them their space and let them go about their lives, and they've lived them quite uneventful, as a matter of fact, in terms of media coverage. A lot of people don't know who they are, and that's a good thing. And so good for them for staying out from underneath the eye of the media. But OJ, I just want to talk a little bit about that, and some commentary on the case. There's been a lot of programs on the television set over the last few weeks leading up to his release. I'm sure you know that 7 years ago he was convicted of armed robbery for storming a hotel room and taking back some of the memorabilia that was rightfully and lawfully his, which came to be discovered, in subsequent civil trials. But he was still nonetheless convicted of an armed robbery charge and sentenced to 33 years in prison. That due in large part probably because they were, had the acquittal from the 1995 trial weighing heavily on their minds and added, that time to that sentence. Typical armed robbery charge for somebody shouldn't have carried more than 5 or 6 years, given what they had in their past. But OJ having a heavy burden in his past, trial than carrying forward here with that sentence. He was fortunate, though, in the parole board hearing that they did not seem to take into consideration that. I mean, honestly, they shouldn't have. It's a completely unrelated matter, and legally speaking, he was acquitted, and that was a completely separate case and should not be considered in the ruling of the parole board's decision to release him. But there was a lot of people that voted in favor of his release. In addition to the parole board, of course, he had a lot of support from people, including the victim himself. The person who he was accused of robbing is a friend of his, is a memorabilia dealer, and even testified on his behalf at his parole hearing. The case of O J Simpson is considered to be the trial of the century, something that is an excellent study in case law, the mistakes of attorneys, and how somebody can buy themselves freedom. If O J Simpson wasn't O J Simpson, he would have never have survived I shouldn't say survived, would never have gotten the acquittal that he got in 1995. The evidence against him was essentially overwhelming. His defense costing $50,000 a day, and he didn't even have the money to pay all that throughout the at that time. O J Simpson, a very successful individual, but he had to continue to make money to pay his legal team, and so he didn't just have all that money readily available. I mean, he had to continue to sell memorabilia, autographs, appearances, speaking events, anything he could do to raise money to pay for his legal team, which was the dream team of attorneys: Kardashian, F. Lee Bailey, Johnny Cochran, Harold Horowitz, or what is the other person there? I know there's two others there. I can't think of off the top of my head. Ironically enough, F. Lee Bailey, I was just reading an article about him, a prized defense attorney, and now essentially broke in L.A. So talk about a fall from grace. He was considered to be a great defense attorney, but now living out in LA and essentially, broke. And so unfortunately, turn of events for somebody very successful. And of course, we know about, Kardashian, the father of the Kardashian women, and his passing. I think he had a heart attack in the late 90s. And also Johnny Cochran have since passed. But the dream team of defense that O J Simpson had, which led to his, a shocking acquittal in the mid 90s at a cost of $50,000 per day. But I've been watching some of the programming that was on television recently, and the idea that there was a second person involved at the crime scene, and the second person is rumored and theorized to have been his other son, Jason Simpson, and who to this day has never been formally questioned by the LAPD. They did have him under. There's a videotape of him talking about this with one of the agencies. I don't believe it was the LAPD necessarily, but he was never really formally investigated as a suspect. And so there's a new series out talking about his involvement and some of the new evidence that they've uncovered to place Jason at the scene of the crime. So what many conspiracy theorists believe is that Jason was the person who committed the murder, and that he had done what he had done. He called OJ, his father, up and admitted what had happened, and then OJ rushed over to the scene, and so that's why they placed a second person at the scene. And so that's where the glove, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. That's where that comes from, because that glove did not fit O.J. Simpson. They believe it was on the hand of Jason Simpson, although they never did try that on him. He really skirted the eye of the law. And people, there's just so much evidence against O.J. at the scene of the crime that the LAPD did not pay a lot of attention to any other suspects. And they had their eye on O.J. from day one. I mean, he had a history of violence against Nicole. He was somebody who, had a temper problem. And so why, complicate the case even further? They had the person that they believed had done it. But when you study the case, you realize, how much contamination was introduced at the crime scene, how poorly the investigation was conducted. And, it's one of those things that make you think, was there somebody else involved? I have no doubt that O.J. was involved in one capacity or another. My question is whether or not there was a second person involved. And I believe, based on the evidence, that there was probably a second person involved. I'm not saying it's necessarily his son, but there was somebody else involved if you look back onto the trial. And one of the biggest, problems, I think, was that glove. Understanding, he had a latex, on underneath of it, but that glove didn't fit. So that glove was either planted there or it belonged to somebody else. Regardless of what you think, it's still the crime or the trial of the century. O J Simpson, now 70 years of age, definitely teasing the media a little bit with his involvement, about the book that I think he wrote, or if he was going to write, If I Did It, in which the title says I did it with the tiny little word if inside the letter I. So he definitely had involvement in the crime. It's just a question of whether or not other people were involved with him. But regardless, I may run into him at a grocery store someday here, being that he's going to be moving into the Tampa Bay, St. Petersburg area and living in close proximity to his son and daughter. Again, his son, not Jason, the other one, Justin, who is a real estate agent with Coldwell Banker in the St. Petersburg office. And then his daughter, her name escapes me off the top of my head, but she is also a real estate investor over in St. Petersburg. But I don't know either of them personally, just know the son because he is an agent with the company. So interesting, trial. A lot of stuff came out of that trial, and a lot of stuff about racial discrimination, racial segregation, police brutality. And I'll talk a little bit about that and my thoughts on that in the coming segment, especially with all the stuff in the news lately surrounding police shootings and the young Australian woman who was just shot by the cops up in Minneapolis. The second shooting in the last year, with the other one being Fernando Castillo as a result of the police department up there in Minneapolis. So we'll talk about that when we come back from the break on That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. Welcome back to That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. Today we're talking about the O J Simpson trial. He's going to be released here pretty soon, likely to end up in the Tampa Bay area, which is my backyard. And so I also want to talk, though, somewhat about police shootings, brutality, discrimination, segregation, all that stuff that's in the news. And it was at the forefront of the O J Simpson trial as well. It's no secret that racial profiling and discrimination has been at the front of many police investigations through the years. African Americans considered to be the criminals, 9 times out of 10 when there could be another race involved. That's just a stereotype that has been pinned to the community, going all the way back, to the Civil War and the freedom that was given to the community at that time. We're still coming out of that age, and fortunately, through the civil rights movement and subsequent movements of the left and changing and development of our society, people are more and more and more accepting of people of alternate ethnicities and beliefs and backgrounds and sexualities. Police are vastly improving themselves, but we still see a lot of fear. We still see a lot of profiling that exists inside of the police community. I was watching the tape of the officer who shot Fernando Castillo last year in Minneapolis, and that was what bothers me about that was if you just watch the tape that was streamed on Facebook Live, it could go either way. At that point, I remained subjective to who was at fault in the shooting, with more of the emphasis being on the officer. When you watch after the acquittal of the officer, they released the dashboard cam. The dashboard cam should have been released to the public beforehand, because that clearly shows the officer overreacting and basically killing Fernando Castillo out of fear. I don't think he killed him out of anything other than just extreme nervous, tense, and fear. And so what happened was Fernando Castillo in the car told the officer that he had a gun. He told him don't go for it. He went to produce. He said, "I'm going to get my ID," and then the officer shot him. So the officer, I don't think, had a death wish against the individual. He was just so nervous that this was a black man in a car who had told him that he had a gun, that he was just that tense that the slightest movement caused his finger to pull the trigger. And so it's that subconscious, it's that mentality that this person is going to try to kill me because they are black. And so it's something that's ingrained inside so many officers and so many also people when they're presented with people of alternate beliefs, alternate colors, and it's this preconceived bias that exists. And that's exactly what happened in that situation. I don't believe that the officer intended to kill him. I don't think he had a death wish against people of the African American race. He was just so nervous that there was a black guy in a car who told him he had a gun, and the slightest movement just caused him to flinch and shoot the person. Had it been me in the car, I wouldn't have been shot. It had been anybody of any other race, they wouldn't have been shot, because the officer probably wouldn't have even had the gun out. But that is just the mentality that our officers have developed on the streets over the last over the last few decades, in response to the crime that is out there on our streets. Majority of our officers do a great job. I'm a strong supporter of law enforcement. I by no means am wanting to think of this as a bashing the police. But then this past week, we see an officer in that same department in Minneapolis shoot an unarmed Australian woman who had reported a sexual assault in the alleyway of her home. Two officers pull up on scene, and she comes out to meet the officers to tell them what had happened. And as she approaches the car, the officer in the passenger seat shoots across the seat. Luckily, he didn't hit his partner, but unfortunately hit her and shot her through the abdomen, and then she died there on the scene. She had no weapon. There's no reason that should happen. They're still shaking their heads as to why an officer was that tense and that scared in that situation that he reacted the way he did. Because that's the only thing that explains it is fear and tension, and because otherwise you have to say that he openly killed him, and I refuse to believe that he and the other officer had a mindset that I want to kill this person. I don't believe that one bit. It's just that they are so tense and so nervous, and they have a preconceived bias that is innate inside of their heads that they can't overcome, that they need to fire upon this person. So how do we as a society overcome this? I'll be honest, being an officer has got to be difficult, because they are constantly in situations that are desperate, that are going to produce fear, that they don't know if the individual has a gun or not, and they know any mistake on their part is going to get, the media is going to get the local society turned against them, when they really just want to defend people against criminals in our community, and rightfully so. And I believe 9 times out of 10, the cops do get the benefit of the doubt, and they should. I do believe that cops are acting in the best interest of their community and based upon what they believe. But it's that preconceived bias and that tension that they get when they see somebody of an alternate race, an African American, that is causing them to react in the way that they are. So how do we overcome that? There's no easy answer for that, but there needs to be testing. There needs to be ways that we can begin to recognize this fear that is inside of them, and how their brain is going to react when they're presented in a standoff situation with somebody who has or may not have a gun, versus whether or not they are white, black, Asian, or Hispanic, whatever the case may be. But 9 times out of 10, it's always the person is a black individual. It was shocking to see this past week that the person was a white woman. That was the first of its kind, at least be reported by the media. Now, I have no doubt that police shootings do happen to all races as well, and they go underreported by the media. The media will gravitate towards the racial profilings, because that's what sells the news, and that's what sells the advertisers on the program. But there definitely exists a preconceived bias within our law enforcement against members of the African American race, the Hispanic American race, and anybody except us white people, and that they are, going to be criminally negligent in whatever capacity that they see fit. And how do you overcome it? It's a very difficult thing to even begin to discuss. I don't have any ideas other than say that we need better testing. We need to be putting law enforcement through better measures. We need to have the cameras on, the dash cameras. The officers in this latest shooting in Minneapolis, their dash cam, or not the dash cam, but their shoulder cam that they are now wearing on their bodies was turned off. Why was it turned off? That's definitely a question that a lot of people have right now at the moment. but overcoming, as I said, the bias against minorities and that fear and that tension and that uncertainty that it creates and the deaths that it causes. How are we going to overcome that with our law enforcement community? Better training and better understanding, I don't know. It's something that needs to happen, because we have too much racial profiling, too much racial discrimination that already exists in our society. We cannot have that extending to our law enforcement as well. It's going to get to a point to where law enforcement begins to decline, because why would you want to go out there and put your life on the line? Because in that moment that you've got to use your gun, people are going to question what it is that you're doing, because a couple of people, or I would say a couple, but other officers have acted inappropriately and shot people. So I think a solution is better solutions to the guns that we carry, to the arms that are provided. We need advancements in those types of devices that are not necessarily kill devices. Something with a stun capacity. I know a basic stun gun isn't going to stop somebody that is afflicted with cocaine, or I wouldn't say afflicted, but on cocaine, or somebody who is on some of the other drugs such as PCP, which creates irrational behavior. But we need better weaponry that can put somebody out but doesn't kill them. That's really a solution that I think needs to be explored more and more so. That way, even when people do make the mistakes of firing on people that are otherwise unarmed or we're not going to harm them, at least they didn't kill them, and then they could go back to their own business after that situation resolved. Unfortunately, when people are killed, you can't turn the clock back and make everything right again, and that just leads to the continual divide that exists within our community across racial lines that I've been talking about this past week on this program and a couple other segments as well. So just important to understand that everybody out there is different. Everybody out there, just because they don't look the way that you look, doesn't mean that they are good, doesn't mean that they are bad. It just means they look different than you. Take the time to get to know people. Don't discriminate against somebody because of the way they look, what they believe, what it is that they do. As long as it's lawful and they're working to help themselves and their family, everybody out there just wants to be taken care of, or take care of their family and have the basic needs and necessities provided to them, including their own civil rights. Too many people discriminate. Too many people have biases against other people that just works against us as a society, and it comes back around to hurt you in one way or another if you're the person that is buying into those beliefs and subscribing to that type of an environment. So again, got to wrap up the program. Just wanted to take some time on this program, talk about O J Simpson coming to the Tampa Bay area, his release here coming up in a couple of months. Granted parole this past week, and just how racial discrimination, racial profiling played into that case, how it continues to play into our society today as American citizens. But we need to take a stand against it and just have conversations about what it is that we can do to prevent tragedies and profiling from happening in coming generations in our communities. So you've been listening to That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business.